He is the producer and founder of the New York Musical Improv Festival, and he's also been featured on Nights of Our Lives at UCB many, many times. I'm so excited to have him here. Please give it up for TJ Mannix.
So there's this bar game that people play sometimes where people try to give their best pickup line. And whenever that game comes up, I only have one, and that is, "Hi, I'm too shy to talk to you, so I'm going to be over there." And I actually said that, and it worked. But it kind of also describes my love life. So I didn't ask anyone out until I was 26 years old. So in high school, I dated two girls. They both asked me out. Their names were Robin and Rabina. Rabina asked me out with a folded up note that she passed me in class, and I was like, yes. Robin and I were coming home from a birthday party in her parents' car, and she grabbed my hand, and she spelled out in my hand, "Are we going out?" Which, if you're ever in that situation, the correct response is yes, if you want to get home. And then in college, one woman asked me out, and her name's Teresa. And Teresa was smart and fun and cute and very Catholic and very innocent and very much a virgin, as was I. And I look back on it, she reminds me of my mother. At least she did until she showed up at my dorm room one night with a makeover. And she was wearing a trench coat and she had lingerie on underneath. Yes? And she had a margarita glass filled with chocolate-covered strawberries. And she said, "I know that you have no classes tomorrow and no tests, and tonight, you're mine." So we made out on the beanbag. And eventually she took a blanket out of her bag and she said, "We're going to the beach." Now this was at the University of Miami, where "we're going to the beach" is code for "now is the time for me to exchange my virginity for your virginity." So I kind of was like, all right, this is gonna happen. Okay, here we go. And I went downstairs and my car had been towed. True. Mood killer. And I remember, I'm not a very religious guy, but I remember looking up and going like, okay, I get it. All right. And unfortunately, our relationship didn't really survive that. But I realized at that point in my life that I needed to stop sitting around and waiting for women to ask me out. Because what I really wanted was to sit around and wait for men to ask me out. So, innocent suburban TJ, I went out to the bars on South Beach, and I would stand in the corner on Saturday night and nurse a beer, and just sit there and go, God, this exists. They don't have this in Boca Raton. And every Saturday night, somebody would come up to me and they would say, "Hey, what precinct do you work at?" Because I was the tall guy with the mustache who was nursing a beer, not hitting on anyone, and not doing coke in Miami in the 80s. So eventually I found a city that was more my speed. And that was Raleigh, North Carolina. Where I still didn't ask anyone out, but I proceeded to date a rainbow roll call of an aerobics instructor, a hairdresser, and a guidance counselor. And if you were dating in the 80s and 90s, there comes a point where it's time for you to get your first HIV test. So I was completely terrified, and it took me a long time to get it. And this was before the internet. So I drove, like you do, 45 minutes away from my home to get the test done so nobody would see me. And back then, you waited at least a week for your results. It wasn't like you could just prick your finger and do a little saliva test. So, worst week of my life. And I drove back out there, and on the way, I made a deal with God. And I said, okay, if this turns out negative, I will volunteer for an AIDS organization. I will give my time, and I will do all the things that I should have already been doing. And I got there, and they sit down across from you, and she paused, and it was the worst pause of my life. And she said, I'm just kidding, you're negative. And so a week later, I was volunteering for the bar brigade, handing out condoms in a bar downtown in Raleigh, that hot spot. And I was paired with a guy who was very Southern and very short and very attractive, and his name was Christopher. And after we handed out all of our condoms, I asked him for a drink. And he said yes. And I asked him on a date, and he said yes. And then he kept on saying yes. He said yes often. And it was great. And I can't really explain why. He was the perfect boyfriend. Like, there was a night where he fixed my car, and then he fixed me dinner. Come on. And so I was working my days at glamorous Blockbuster Video, and my nights I was doing regional theater, and every other minute was spent with Christopher. And at one point he said, we need to talk. And he said, I know that you have been cheating on me. And I said, no, I haven't. I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, you've been cheating on me with New York City. And he said, I know that you want to be an actor, and I don't think we can be together until you get that out of your system and you move to New York. Which, of course, made him even better. Amazing. So I went, and I said I'd moved to New York for a year, and I worked my butt off and auditioned, and I got work, and I realized this is where I needed to be. So we made it work. We did the long distance thing. And I flew down there, and we'd talk on the phone, and we stayed in touch, and we realized he was going to stay down there to be with his family, and I needed to stay in New York. And so we stayed in touch until we didn't. And about 5 years later, I got an invitation to Christopher's wedding, to a woman. Yeah, wow. And I realized he had been there for me through everything. He was my rock. He's the one that told me, don't be a chicken shit, move to New York, go after your dreams. And, I've been here for 18 years. And so I said, okay, I'm going. And I went to the wedding by myself. And it was in North Carolina, and it was in a log cabin church with a slave loft. And when you walked up, they handed you a little plastic church where you could tear the steeple off and blow bubbles instead of throwing rice. So I sat in the third row, and I watched, and he looked incredible. And she looked incredible. And it was a beautiful ceremony until we got to the point where the minister said, is there anyone here who has any reason why these two should not be wed? And then he did this. And he looked at me. And I didn't know this guy. And then I realized that the wedding party started turning around to look where he was looking and start to look at me. And there's a slow burn from the church as they start following the eye line of everyone, and I'm looking over my shoulder. And I looked at the minister and was like, go, go. They got married. We ripped the steeples off the church. We blew bubbles. And they had a reception out in the country at his parents' house. And it was the kind of thing, it was card tables and crock pots and Tupperware. And I will say, I've never had a more awkward moment than when I brought my plate to the potato salad and his mom was standing there and looked me in the eye while she gave me potato salad. So I finally got to talk to Christopher, and he told me what was going on with his life. And he said, I'm marrying my best friend. And I said, that's great. I'm really happy for you. And he said, well, she was my roommate. And she can't afford to go to college. And if I marry her, my company will pay for her to go to college. Yeah, I know. He's so amazing. Anyway, so that night at the wedding hotel, I had my room reserved, and I found out that the bride had a boyfriend. And she spent the wedding night with her boyfriend. And I spent the wedding night in the honeymoon suite. So, postscript, they stayed married until she was done with college. He fell in love with a great guy. They've been together for 13 years, of course. They have a fantastic relationship. He's a great guy. And I still have the little plastic church. And I'm in like my 10th apartment in New York. But I keep it up where like the champagne glasses are. And every once in a while I take it down and I blow a couple of bubbles and think about Christopher.